I've replayed that afternoon in my head more times than I can count. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd picked a different coffee shop or left my office 5 minutes earlier. Maybe nothing. Maybe I'd still be married. Maybe I'd still believe I knew my wife better than anyone else on the planet. Instead, I walked into that cafe, ordered a black coffee and a turkey sandwich, and accidentally met my wife's best friend. A woman I'd never seen before. A woman my wife had somehow managed to keep away from me for 12 years. The strange part wasn't that she recognized me. The strange part was the look on her face when I told her my name. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't confusion. It was pure horror. At the time, I had no idea why. Now I wish I'd never found out. My name's Michael. I'm 39, and until about 6 months ago, I thought I had one of those boring marriages that people joke about. Not boring in a bad way. Boring because nothing dramatic ever happened. We didn't scream at each other. We didn't play games. Neither of us hid our phones or disappeared in the middle of the night. If you had asked me to describe my wife in one word, I would have said steady. Sarah was the kind of person who remembered birthdays without Facebook reminders. She'd buy my favorite cereal because she noticed I was almost out before I did. Every Sunday we'd walk to the farmer's market, spend way too much money on fresh bread, then promise each other we'd actually cook a nice dinner that week. Half the time we'd end up ordering pizza instead. Life wasn't exciting. It was comfortable. And honestly, I thought comfortable was exactly what a good marriage was supposed to feel like. Looking back now, there was one thing that should have made me ask questions years earlier. Just one. Sarah had a whole group of close friends. At least, that's what I thought. I knew all their names. Lisa, Amanda, Rachel, Jen, Nicole. I'd been hearing those names since we were dating. Lisa's having a hard week. Amanda finally got promoted. Rachel's husband lost his job. Jen thinks she's moving to Texas. I felt like I knew these women. The funny thing is, I had never actually met a single one of them. Not once. That sounds ridiculous now, doesn't it? Trust me, it sounds even more ridiculous when you realize we were married for 12 years. At first, it never seemed strange. Sarah would say she was meeting the girls for dinner. I'd tell her to have fun. Sometimes she'd go to someone's birthday. Sometimes it was wine night. Sometimes a weekend cabin trip. Sometimes brunch. It all sounded completely normal because honestly, it was normal. People have their own friends. Married couples don't have to do everything together. That was always my attitude. The first time I ever asked if I should come was a few years into our marriage. She was getting ready to leave, and I said, "Want some company?" She smiled and kissed me on the cheek. "I think you'd be bored. It's really just the girls." That made sense, so I stayed home. The next time there was another dinner. Then another birthday, then someone got engaged, then someone got divorced. There was always something happening, and somehow, it was always just the girls. I never pushed it because Sarah wasn't secretive about anything else. She'd come home and tell me stories. Apparently, Amanda always had too much wine after 2 glasses. Rachel interrupted everyone. Jen couldn't keep a secret to save her life. I'd laugh at stories about people I'd never met and never once think how weird that actually was. A couple of times I even offered to drive her, especially if it was raining. She always had an answer. "It's okay, Lisa's picking me up." Or, "Rachel's already outside." I'd tell her to have fun. She'd kiss me goodbye, and that was it. Looking back, I realized something else. Not once, not a single time, did one of those women ever come to our front door. Sarah always walked outside to meet them. Again, I never questioned it. I figured maybe they hated parking. Or maybe they were in a hurry. Your brain is amazing at explaining things when you already trust someone. The weirdest part was that Sarah knew everyone in my life. She came to my office Christmas parties. She knew my coworkers by name. My sister absolutely adored her. My mom called Sarah more often than she called me. She fit perfectly into my world. I just never fit into hers. Every now and then one of my friends would joke, "So when are we finally meeting these famous friends of Sarah's?" She'd laugh and wave them off. "Oh, you'd all hate each other," or "They're honestly kind of shy," or "It's easier this way." The answers were always different. I never noticed that the result was always exactly the same. No introductions. Ever. If I'm being honest, I think trust can make you lazy. Not because you stop caring, because you stop asking simple questions. You assume there's probably a reasonable explanation, and after enough years, you stop noticing that you never actually got one. That's exactly what I did. Then came that Friday afternoon. I'd taken the day off because I had to renew my passport downtown. The appointment took less than 15 minutes, and since I suddenly had half a day to kill, I decided to grab lunch before driving home. The cafe was busy but not packed. I ordered my food and stepped aside to wait. That's when I noticed a woman standing a few feet away. She glanced at me once, then again. The second time she looked so hard that I actually turned around because I thought she had to be looking at someone behind me. There was nobody there. A few seconds later she walked over. "Excuse me," I smiled. "Yeah." She looked nervous, almost scared. "Are you Michael?" I nodded. "I am." The second I said that, the paper coffee cup slipped right out of her hand and hit the floor. Coffee went everywhere. People turned to look. The employee behind the counter grabbed paper towels. She didn't even notice. She just kept staring at me. Finally, she asked one more question. "You're Sarah's husband?" "Yeah." She covered her mouth with one hand. For a few seconds, she didn't say anything at all. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, "Oh my God." I gave a nervous little laugh. "Do we know each other?" She shook her head. "No." Another pause. Then she looked me straight in the eyes and said something that made absolutely no sense. "You weren't supposed to exist like this." Before I could ask her what that meant, she turned around, walked out of the cafe, and disappeared into the crowd. I stood there staring after her with my lunch sitting on the counter behind me. And for the first time in 12 years of marriage, I asked myself a question I should have asked a long time ago. Why had my wife spent 12 years making sure that woman never met me? I didn't even touch my sandwich. I just stood there staring at the door she'd walked through, trying to convince myself I'd completely misunderstood what had just happened. Maybe she'd confused me with someone else. Maybe Sarah had another friend named Michael. Maybe she'd been having some kind of panic attack. There had to be a normal explanation because the alternative didn't even make sense. How could a complete stranger react like that just because she met her friend's husband? By the time I got home, I'd almost talked myself into forgetting the whole thing. Almost. Sarah was already there when I walked in. She worked from home on Fridays, and she was sitting on the couch with her laptop balanced on her knees. She looked up, smiled, and said, "Hey, I thought you weren't getting back until later." I finished earlier than I expected. "Everything go okay?" "Yeah." She closed her laptop and walked over to kiss me. Nothing about her seemed different. Nothing about her seemed guilty. If anything, she looked exactly like she always did. That somehow made everything even stranger. We ordered Thai food that night, watched 2 episodes of some crime show we'd been following, and went to bed at our usual time. I almost told her about the woman in the cafe. The words got as far as my throat, then I stopped myself. I don't really know why. Maybe because I didn't want to sound ridiculous. "Hey honey." Some random woman looked terrified when she found out I was your husband. Even in my own head it sounded insane. So I let it go. Or at least I tried to. The next morning we were making breakfast when I decided to ask something that seemed harmless. "So who's Lisa again?" Sarah looked over from the stove. "My friend Lisa." "I know that." She laughed. "The one I've known since college." "Oh." That answer caught me off guard. "I thought you met at work." "No." She smiled. "You're thinking of Amanda." "Right." I laughed it off. The conversation lasted maybe 15 seconds, but something about it stuck with me. Not because of what she said, because I realized I couldn't picture Lisa's face. I'd been hearing that woman's name for over a decade, and if someone had offered me $1 million to describe what she looked like, I couldn't have done it. Later that afternoon, Sarah mentioned she was grabbing coffee with Rachel. Normally, I would have barely noticed. Instead, I found myself asking, "The Rachel with the golden retriever?" She frowned. "No, that's Jen." "Oh." Again, nothing suspicious, nothing dramatic, just another little reminder that these women somehow existed only as stories. I knew pieces of their lives. I didn't know a single thing about them as actual people. That evening, I caught myself doing something I'd never done before. I opened Sarah's Facebook profile. It wasn't private. We were friends. I wasn't snooping. At least that's what I told myself. I just wanted to put faces to the names. Except, there weren't any. Her profile picture was the 2 of us at the beach. Family photos, vacation pictures, Christmas, my birthday, our anniversary. Everything looked completely normal. I kept scrolling. 3 years, 5 years, 8 years. There were pictures with my parents, pictures with my coworkers, pictures with my sister, pictures with neighbors, pictures from office parties, pictures from weddings, but not a single photo with Lisa, or Amanda, or Rachel, or Jen, or Nicole. I frowned. That was odd. Most people posted at least one girls' night every now and then. Sarah never had. I clicked the tagged photos instead. There had to be something there. Again, nothing. No birthdays, no brunches, no cabin trips, nothing. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it suddenly felt ridiculous. How could someone have 5 close friends for over a decade and leave absolutely no trace of them online? Then I immediately answered my own question. Easy. Some people just hated social media. That was probably it. I closed my laptop and told myself I was overthinking everything. Sunday afternoon we drove to my mom's house for dinner. Halfway there, my mother asked Sarah how the girls were doing. Sarah smiled without missing a beat. Oh, they're good. Still seeing Lisa every week. Almost every week. My mom nodded. I've always wanted to meet her. Sarah laughed. I'm sure you will someday. For some reason, that sentence stayed with me. Someday. 12 years. Still someday. The following Tuesday, I was cleaning out a closet upstairs, looking for an old toolbox, when I came across a plastic storage bin we'd packed during our last move. It was full of photo albums, actual printed photographs, something we hadn't looked at in years. I carried one downstairs and started flipping through it while Sarah was still working. There were pictures from our honeymoon, my cousin's wedding, my nephew's first birthday, Christmas at my parents' house, our 5th anniversary. Then I found a page from one of Sarah's birthdays. There were 6 women standing around her, all smiling at the camera. No men. I looked closer. One of them had to be Lisa, or Amanda, or Rachel. I had no idea which one. That realization hit me harder than I expected. These were supposedly some of the most important people in my wife's life, and I couldn't identify a single one of them. I turned the page. Another birthday. Different restaurant. Same women. Still no me. That wasn't strange by itself. People celebrate separately all the time. Then I noticed something else. There wasn't a single picture anywhere in that album where Sarah's friends and I appeared together. Not one. Not at our wedding. Not at birthdays. Not at holiday parties. Nothing. I frowned and went back to our wedding photos. My family. Her family. College friends. Coworkers. Bridesmaids. Groomsmen. Then I stopped. One of the bridesmaids looked familiar. Very familiar. Brown hair. Business clothes. I stared at the picture for several seconds before it hit me. It was the woman from the cafe. The woman who'd dropped her coffee. Which meant only one thing. She hadn't just known Sarah. She'd stood beside her on our wedding day. And somehow, I had absolutely no memory of ever meeting her. I must have looked at that wedding photo for 10 minutes. The more I stared at it, the less sense it made. There she was, standing 2 people away from Sarah, smiling at the camera, holding flowers. There was no question it was the same woman from the cafe. Same face, same eyes, same small scar near her left eyebrow that I'd noticed when she'd looked at me. So why couldn't I remember meeting her? I closed the album and tried to picture our wedding. It had been small, around 80 guests. I remembered talking to my uncle for half an hour about football. I remembered my best man getting embarrassingly drunk. I remembered my mother crying through the ceremony. I even remembered the cake collapsing when the venue staff tried to move it. But Sarah's bridesmaids, honestly, they were just a blur. I knew there had been 4 of them. I couldn't have named a single one. That bothered me more than I wanted to admit. When Sarah finished work that evening, I carried the album into the living room. "Hey," I said casually. "Who's this?" She looked down for maybe 2 seconds. "Oh, that's Lisa." There it was. Finally, a face to the name. I waited for something else. Maybe why, or how come you're asking? Instead, she handed the album back without another glance. I smiled. No reason. I was just looking through old pictures. She nodded and went back to answering emails. That should have been the end of it. Instead, it made me even more uncomfortable. Because if that really was Lisa, why had she reacted like she'd seen a ghost? For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I wasn't trying to catch Sarah in a lie. That wasn't where my head was. I just wanted a logical explanation. Every time I thought I'd found one, something didn't fit. Then Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. Unknown number. Normally I ignore those. For some reason, I answered. "Hello?" Silence. Then a woman said, "Michael?" It was her. The woman from the cafe. "I hope I'm not bothering you." I sat up straighter. "How did you get my number?" "I'm sorry." She ignored the question. "I wasn't planning to call." "So why are you calling?" Another long silence. Finally she sighed. "I think we should talk." I almost laughed. I've been hoping you'd say that. She gave me the name of a small park about 15 minutes from my office and asked if I could meet her after work. I got there first. She showed up 10 minutes later carrying 2 coffees. She handed me one without asking how I took it. I owe you an explanation, she said. Yeah, but I can't tell you everything. That immediately irritated me. Then why am I here? Because, she looked genuinely upset. Because if I tell you everything, I'll destroy 12 years of someone else's life in one conversation. I frowned. My life. She looked down at her coffee. I don't know anymore. We sat in silence for a few seconds. Finally, I asked the question that had been driving me crazy. Why did you act like that when you saw me? She took a deep breath. Because you weren't the person I expected. What does that even mean? She looked me straight in the eyes. I've known about you for 12 years. Apparently not very well. No. She shook her head slowly. Not well. Then what did you know? Another pause. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. I probably shouldn't do this. She opened a conversation. The messages were years old. Really old. She scrolled for a while before stopping. I'm only going to show you a few. She handed me the phone. The first message was from Sarah. I don't think Michael even realizes how cruel he can be anymore. I frowned. Cruel? I kept reading. He apologized this morning, but it doesn't matter. It's always the same cycle. Another. Sometimes I feel like I'm disappearing in my own house. Then another. He says nobody else would put up with me anyway. Maybe he's right. I stopped reading. My stomach tightened. I looked up at Lisa. I never said any of this. I know. No. I shook my head. I mean literally. Those words. They never happened. Lisa didn't argue. She simply nodded. I know. I stared at her. If you know that, then why? Because that's who we believed you were. Those words hit harder than I expected. I looked back at the phone. There were dozens, maybe hundreds of messages. Years of conversations. Years of stories. Years of a marriage I didn't recognize. The Michael in those messages wasn't impatient once in a while. He was manipulative, cold, controlling. He isolated Sarah, belittled her, made her afraid to speak. None of it sounded remotely like my life. It was like reading about someone who happened to share my name. I handed the phone back. This is insane. Lisa swallowed. I know. No. I leaned forward. You don't. I heard my own voice getting louder. You think you've known me for 12 years. She didn't respond. You've hated me for 12 years. Still nothing. And we've never even had a conversation. She looked like she wanted to disappear. Finally, she whispered, I didn't hate you. I laughed. Come on. I pitied Sarah. That's not an answer. No, she nodded. It isn't. Another long silence settled between us. Eventually, I asked the question that mattered most. So tell me. I kept my voice as calm as I could. Did Sarah lie to you? Lisa closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were full of tears. I can't answer that. Why not? Because. She stood up. That's something you need to ask your wife. She started walking away. Lisa. She stopped. I raised my voice just enough for her to hear. One last question. She turned around. Has any of your group ever actually met me before last week? For a long moment, she just stared at me. Then she quietly said, No. And with that, she walked away. I drove home feeling like I was living someone else's life. I kept replaying everything she'd shown me. The messages, the accusations, the version of me that existed inside Sarah's conversations. When I got home, Sarah was upstairs taking a shower. Her laptop was open on the dining table. I wasn't planning to touch it. I honestly wasn't. Then a notification appeared in the corner of the screen. A folder had synced to cloud storage. For just a second, the folder name flashed across the display before disappearing. Therapy. Something about that name made me stop. Without really thinking, I moved the mouse. The folder was still there. I clicked it. Inside were dozens of documents. Most had ordinary names. But one file, sitting near the top of the list, made every hair on my arm stand up. Journal, Michael. For a few seconds, I just stared at the screen. I knew exactly what I should do. Close the laptop. Walk away. Wait for Sarah to come downstairs and ask her about everything I'd learned. That would have been the right thing to do. Instead, I opened the file. The first page looked normal. It wasn't a diary. It wasn't a therapist's report. It was a Word document. The date in the top corner caught my eye. April 2014. About a year after we got married. The first entry read, Michael got annoyed because I forgot to pay the electric bill. We argued for maybe 10 minutes. I hate disappointing him. I frowned. That actually happened. I remembered it. I'd forgotten to mail the payment too, but we'd both assumed the other had done it. We argued, then ordered Chinese food that night and laughed about it. Nothing unusual. I scrolled down. Another entry. Sometimes I feel like Michael expects me to have everything under control. That wasn't exactly unfair. I worked long hours back then. I probably did expect too much. Then another. He gets frustrated so quickly. I sat back. So far, nothing shocking. If anything, it felt honest. Marriage isn't perfect. Everyone gets frustrated. Everyone argues. Then I opened the next document. This one was dated about 6 months later. The same argument about the electric bill was there again. Except now it read differently. Michael exploded because I forgot to pay the bill. He made me feel completely useless. I blinked. Exploded? That wasn't what happened. I kept reading. Another familiar memory. We'd missed a dinner with friends because I got stuck at work. The first document simply said, Michael had to work late again. I know he couldn't help it, but I felt lonely. The newer version said, Michael chose work over me again. I don't think my feelings even matter anymore. I frowned. That wasn't just remembering something differently. That was editing it. I opened another file. Then another. Each one was newer than the last. Each one retold old stories. And every time, the details changed just a little. An argument became yelling. Yelling became intimidation. Frustration became emotional manipulation. Disappointment became control. It wasn't happening all at once. It happened inch by inch, like watching someone slowly increase the brightness on a screen until you forgot how dark it used to be. I opened a document from 2018. There was a paragraph highlighted in yellow. Under it, Sarah had written herself a note. Too dramatic. Make this sound more believable. I felt my stomach drop. Another note. Don't say every day. Say more often lately. That's more realistic. Another. Remember to mention how isolated you felt. I stopped breathing for a second. These weren't journal entries anymore. They were drafts. Edited. Rewritten. Refined. Like someone writing a novel. Except the novel was our marriage. I kept scrolling. There were dozens of versions of the same stories. A disagreement over money. A canceled vacation. A forgotten anniversary dinner. Every real event had been rewritten again and again until it barely resembled what had actually happened. The scariest part wasn't that the stories were false. It was that they always started with something real. A normal disagreement. A normal disappointment. Then each version added one small detail, one sentence, one feeling, one exaggeration. By the final draft, the original event was almost impossible to recognize. I suddenly remembered what Lisa had said. I've known about you for 12 years. No, she hadn't. She'd known this version, the edited version, the rewritten version. I opened another folder. This one wasn't called journal. It was called messages. Inside were dozens of documents. Each one had someone's name. Lisa, Amanda, Rachel, Jen, Nicole. I clicked Lisa's. Every document began the same way. Real conversations copied from text messages. Except, Sarah had written notes underneath them. Almost like reminders. Mention what happened with the vacation. Bring this up next time she asks how things are. Don't tell her everything at once. My hands started shaking. There was a pattern. Every few weeks, another story, another update, another carefully timed piece of information. It wasn't random. It was almost serialized, like episodes of a TV show. Each conversation ended with just enough drama to make someone ask what happened next. Every answer made Michael seem a little worse than before. Every month the marriage became darker. Every year the fictional version moved farther away from the real one. I suddenly understood something that hadn't made sense before. Why none of her friends had ever met me. If they had, the story would have fallen apart immediately. One dinner, one normal conversation, one afternoon watching football together. That would have been enough. The man they'd spent years worrying about simply didn't exist. So Sarah made sure those worlds never touched. She wasn't protecting herself from me. She was protecting the story from reality. I leaned back in the chair and covered my face. How many lies had this taken? Hundreds? Thousands? No, probably more. Every girls' night. Every brunch. Every weekend trip. Every phone call. Every text message. For 12 years. Then I noticed another folder. It had no date, no description, just one word: therapy. I opened it. Inside were scanned worksheets, coping exercises, letters that had never been sent, reflections. Most looked like things a therapist might ask someone to write, except something felt wrong. The dates didn't line up. Some documents were written years apart. Others had obviously been revised. One file contained 3 completely different versions of the same memory. The newest version barely resembled the oldest. Then I reached the very bottom of the folder. There was one document I hadn't noticed before. Unlike the others, it didn't have a date. It didn't mention therapy. It had a single title: If Michael Ever Finds Out. I heard the bathroom door upstairs open. Footsteps. Sarah was coming downstairs. My hand froze on the mouse. I closed the laptop just as Sarah walked into the kitchen. She was drying her hair with a towel and smiled the second she saw me. "You're home early." "Yeah. You okay? Can we talk?" The smile disappeared almost immediately. Not because of what I said, because of how I said it. She looked at me for a couple of seconds, then quietly put the towel over the back of a chair. "What's wrong?" I didn't answer right away. I was trying to figure out where to start. The woman in the cafe? Lisa? The messages? The documents? The folder? None of it sounded real. Finally, I asked the simplest question I could think of. "Why have I never met your friends?" She blinked. "What? In 12 years. I kept my voice calm. I've never met Lisa. Never met Amanda. Never met Rachel. Never met any of them." She looked confused. "I don't understand. I met Lisa last week. Everything changed. It wasn't dramatic." She didn't gasp. She didn't drop a glass. She just stopped moving, like someone had pressed pause. "You met," she swallowed. "Lisa? In a cafe?" Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then she quietly asked, "What did she tell you?" "It wasn't." "Who?" "It wasn't." "Are you sure it was Lisa?" "It wasn't." "What happened?" "It was." "What did she tell you?" That was the moment I knew. She already understood exactly why I was asking. I reached into my backpack and placed the wedding photo on the table. I didn't even recognize her. Sarah looked down at it. I recognized her because she dropped her coffee when I told her my name. She closed her eyes. "I know." "You know?" "I figured." Her voice cracked. "I figured this day would come eventually." I stared at her. "You planned for this?" "No." She shook her head. "I just knew I couldn't keep 2 worlds apart forever." I took a slow breath. "I opened your laptop." She nodded. "I guessed you probably would." I read the documents. No reaction. I read the messages. Still nothing. Finally, I asked the question that had been burning inside me since I left the park. "Were any of them true?" She looked up. "Some parts." "Some parts?" "I was lonely sometimes." "I know." "You worked a lot." "I know." "We argued." "I know." I leaned forward. "But that's not what I asked." Silence. "Did I ever tell you nobody else would love you?" She shook her head. "No." "Did I isolate you?" "No." "Did I manipulate you?" "No." "Did I emotionally abuse you?" The answer came almost too quietly to hear. "No." I let out a long breath, not because I was relieved, because hearing her say it somehow hurt even more than reading the documents. I looked at her for what felt like an entire minute. Then I asked the question I never thought I'd have to ask my own wife. "So why?" She started crying before she answered. Not loud crying, not dramatic, just tears she seemed too tired to stop. "I never meant for it to become this." "What did you mean?" She laughed once. It was the saddest sound I'd ever heard. "You remember Amanda?" "The one I've never met." She nodded. "When we were younger, everything happened to everyone else." I frowned. "I don't understand." "Rachel's husband cheated on her." She counted on her fingers. "Jen almost died during childbirth." "Lisa went through a horrible divorce." "Nicole lost her father." She looked at me. "They all had these enormous things happening in their lives. And you didn't." She nodded. "I had a good husband." I didn't know what to say. She wiped her face. "The first lie wasn't even really a lie." "What do you mean?" "I told Lisa we'd argued." "We had." "I told her I cried afterward." She looked down. "I did. So far that's true." She nodded again. Then she hugged me. I frowned. And she looked at me like I mattered. The room went quiet. I know how pathetic that sounds. I didn't interrupt. "So the next time something happened," she paused. I made it sound a little worse. "A little. I wanted someone to ask if I was okay." She laughed bitterly. "They did." I remembered the notes I'd seen. Too dramatic. more believable. She continued. Every time I told a story, I realized it had to match the last one. I nodded slowly. If Michael raised his voice once, she looked at me, then people expected him to raise it again. If he forgot an anniversary, then maybe next time he forgot on purpose. If he worked late, then maybe he was avoiding me. Her shoulders slumped. I didn't even notice when I stopped talking about our actual marriage. You started talking about the other one. She closed her eyes. Yes, the one in the messages. She nodded. The one they knew. I remembered something Lisa had said. We believed that's who you were. Sarah whispered. They loved me. I frowned. What? My friends. Tears rolled down her face. They checked on me. They called. They told me I deserved better. They invited me to stay with them. They reminded me I wasn't alone. She laughed through the tears. They cared so much. I finally understood. Every offer to help, every late-night phone call, every message saying you deserve better, was built on a lie. I asked quietly, so why didn't you leave? She looked genuinely confused. Leave? If they thought I was abusive, I held her gaze. Why didn't you leave me? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked around the kitchen, the same kitchen we'd painted together 5 years earlier, the same table where we'd eaten thousands of dinners, the same house we'd built our life in. Finally, she whispered, because I loved my real life. I felt something twist inside my chest. I loved you. Another pause. She struggled to finish. I loved the person I became when I told them about the other one. I looked away. For 12 years, she'd been living inside 2 marriages. One with me, one with everyone else. And somehow, both had become real to her. I stood up. She didn't try to stop me. As I reached the doorway, I turned back one last time. There was only one question left, the only one that actually mattered. I looked straight at her and said, "Did you ever love me? Or did you only love the story about surviving me?" She opened her mouth to answer. And for the first time since we'd met, I wasn't sure I wanted to hear it. She looked at me for a long time before she answered. I loved you. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I never lied about that. I didn't say anything. She took a slow breath. But I also loved the version of myself that existed around my friends. There it was, the sentence I'd been waiting for, the one that somehow explained everything without making any of it easier to accept. I was the woman they worried about. She looked down at her hands. They called me every day. They checked on me. They reminded me I deserved better. They made me feel important. A tear rolled down her cheek. I couldn't give that up. I nodded once, not because I agreed, because I finally understood. The marriage wasn't competing against another man. It was competing against a story. And stories are dangerous. Stories don't argue over bills. Stories don't leave dishes in the sink. Stories don't forget anniversaries or spend too much money on takeout. Stories only get better every time you tell them. Real life never stands a chance. I slept in the guest room that night. Neither of us cried. Neither of us yelled. Neither of us tried to save what was already gone. Over the next few weeks, we talked more than we probably had in years. Not about fixing the marriage. About understanding it. Sarah admitted something that honestly scared me. There were days I almost believed it. I looked at her. The stories? She nodded. I knew they weren't true. A pause. But after telling them for so many years, she struggled to explain it. I'd remember the version I told everyone before I'd remember what actually happened. That hit me harder than everything else. Because I believed her. Not that the stories were true, that she genuinely couldn't separate them anymore. She'd rewritten our marriage so many times that even she had started living inside the edited version. About a month later, we met with a mediator. There wasn't much to fight over. No children, no dramatic courtroom battle. We sold the house, split the money, divided the furniture. It all felt strangely ordinary. The end of our marriage looked nothing like the story that had destroyed it. On the day I finished moving the last of my boxes into a small apartment across town, Sarah stood by the front door. I am sorry. I looked at her. I know. I never wanted to hurt you. I know. She shook her head. I didn't know how to stop. For the first time in months, I believed every word she said. That didn't change anything. Some things are too broken to rebuild. About 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I stopped by the same cafe where all of this had started. I wasn't looking for anyone. I just happened to be nearby. As I walked out with my coffee, someone called my name. Michael? I turned around. Lisa. This time neither of us looked shocked. She smiled awkwardly. Mind if I sit for a minute? We found a table outside. For a while we talked about nothing. The weather, work. The kind of conversation two strangers have when they both know they're really there to discuss something else. Finally she sighed. I heard about the divorce. I nodded. So did everyone else. She stared into her coffee. I don't know if this helps. She hesitated. But we've all been talking a lot these last few months. About Sarah? And about you. I gave a small laugh. I imagine that's different now. You have no idea. She looked embarrassed. Michael? Another pause. We all hated you. She didn't soften the words. She didn't try to make them sound nicer. We thought you were dangerous. We thought you destroyed her confidence. We thought she stayed because she was too afraid to leave. I looked out toward the parking lot. I figured. No. She shook her head. I don't think you understand. She looked genuinely ashamed. We had never heard your voice. That sentence stayed with me. 12 years. They'd built an entire opinion of me. Not one of them had ever spent 5 minutes in the same room with me. Not one. Lisa looked close to tears. I'm so sorry. I smiled. Not because I was happy. Because carrying anger suddenly felt exhausting. You know the strangest part. She looked at me. I don't think Sarah was trying to make you hate me anymore. Lisa frowned. What do you mean? I think she started out looking for sympathy. I took a sip of my coffee. Eventually, I looked at the people walking past the cafe. She needed the story as much as she needed the marriage. Lisa didn't answer. There wasn't much she could say. As we stood up to leave, she stopped me one last time. I've thought about this every day since we met. So have I. She looked down for a second before asking quietly, do you hate her? I thought about it. Really thought about it. Then I shook my head. No, I don't think she ever set out to become the person she became. Lisa nodded. I think one lie turned into another. And another. And after 12 years, there was no way back. We walked to our cars together. Before getting in, Lisa looked at me one last time. I'm sorry we believed a version of you that never existed. I rested my hand on the car door. Then I said something I'd been thinking about for weeks. Honestly, I looked back at her. I don't think Sarah believed in the real version of me anymore either. Lisa didn't reply. She didn't need to. She already understood. It's been 6 months since the divorce. People ask if I trust anyone after what happened. The answer is yes. I still believe trust matters. But I've learned something I wish I'd understood years ago. Trust isn't pretending every question has an innocent explanation. Trust isn't ignoring the things that don't make sense because asking feels uncomfortable. If something in your life keeps making you think, that's a little strange. Don't ignore it just because the rest of your life seems perfect. Sometimes the smallest unanswered question is connected to the biggest truth you'll ever uncover. I ignored one question for 12 years. Why had I never met my wife's closest friends? By the time I finally learned the answer, I realized I'd been living in only one of our marriages. She'd been living in two.